Hello and welcome once again to In the Round Conversations from Lament to Hope. My name is James Ravenscroft, and I am in ministry at St. James United Church here in St. John's in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I am a chaplain at Queen's College. It's a pleasure to once again be in conversation as we ponder where are we at as church. We experiencing shrinking congregations. We are experiencing congregations that have had to parishes that have had to close. We've grappling with the history we've experienced as church in Newfoundland and Labrador in terms of abuse that's happened, in terms of abuse of power that has happened. So many things have happened as church, and we carry all of that on our hearts. And so we need to lament. But we're also now in the season of Easter, and we need to ponder. Where does lament move us from that experience of wound into another story? And so we have some wonderful people here to share in this conversation. You'll note that we are on Zoom this time rather than all gathered at Queen's College, and that is because one of our panelists is Amy Richter, who is joining us from Frederick in Maryland in the United States of America. Amy is a priest with the Episcopal Church in the United States and is leaving a role as interim rector at a church in Frederick, but she is known to us at Queen's College, known to us in Newfoundland because she and her spouse were in ministry in Newfoundland and Labrador, in Western Newfoundland, and also took some time at Queen's. And so we've come to know and love Amy very, very much. Also joining us is Emily Rowe. Emily is the editor of Anglican Life, which is a tri-diocesan periodical for Newfoundland and Labrador, and her spouse is a Anglican priest here in St. John's and likes to hang about in multiple ways. Both John and, of course, Emily does this at Queen's, and is known to have come to Queen's to sell Girl Guide cookies. And so why not be part of the conversation simply based on that? But also significant within Emily's own story is that the parish of St. Michael and All Angels in St. John's had to close its building and is now relocated for a time at the cathedral. And that carries with it its own experience. And finally, we have Susan Sheppard, who is a designated lay minister with the United Church of Canada. She serves the congregations of Bell Island and Portugal Cove, as well as St. James United Church, which hint, that would mean that Susan and I are in team ministry together. Susan is a Christian education minister, comes with much experience around faith formation, as well as walking with people in their own experiences of hurt, and is a graduate of Queen's College, graduating there in 2010. So welcome to the three of you. And we begin first with that recollection, as we did our very first gathering, that lament names our experience of hurt and anger and frustration and a cry out to God, why is this happening? But also lament carries with it an opening door into what is possible, recognizing that God is the one in whom we trust. And so we begin we have two passages this time round. The first is a short one. It is from John's Gospel, chapter 20, and it is beginning at the 19th verse. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Judean authorities, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." And then secondarily, from Luke 24, beginning at the 36th verse. And to preface it, that it begins shortly after Jesus has been walking on the road unrecognized with a couple of folks heading from Jerusalem to Emmaus and walking with them in their pain and in their trauma. They have returned to Jerusalem, and this is how it begins. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see. For a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written, that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things, and see, I am sending upon you what my Father promised. So stay here in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high." Now, what struck us in both of these, at least this is why Carmel and I thought this was a good way to go as an initial exploration, is that Jesus, though risen, carries with him his wounds. Very obviously said in John's passage, less obviously in the Luke passage, but of course he shows them his hands and his feet, and therefore his woundedness. And like anyone who has experienced trauma, anybody who has experienced something drastic, hurtful in their lives, that wound is still present, will always be present in a certain sense. And we don't know. I mean, some people like to say, well, perhaps they're just scars. Maybe not. Maybe there's still very, very fresh wounds that Jesus comes with. We don't know. He able to speak to them from that space, and therefore he can understand their trauma as well, which I find is so amazing in the text. And yet there he is. I mean, they've all abandoned him, and he shows up without anger, but understands their pain and speaks to them with compassion. That's how I experience the text. But you have been pondering this text for way longer than I have. So I invite you just to initially respond. What's your experience of these two readings, and what do they say to us about where we're at in our own woundedness and pain? Whoever wishes to go first, just go for it.
I'll say something to get us started, I guess. And thank you for the opportunity to meditate on these two dramatic resurrection texts, right? They're not just appearances of Jesus. This is the resurrected Jesus who appears in the midst of his disciples and yet bears these wounds or scars. I've been trying to think of the intersection of this woundedness and the truth of the scars in light of lament. And one of the things that's true of lament in the biblical tradition is that it's really about honesty and open-hearted honesty about the situation people find themselves in, right? We are at the end of our rope. There is nothing more we can do for ourselves. The only thing we have left to do at this point is to call upon God. And um, and not just to call out to God, oh God, please help us, but to call on God to be God, to call on God to be the God that we know, the God that we know from the past, the God who has kept promises before and with whom we've been in relationship all along. But it's also a God who makes promises for the future in the biblical tradition. And so one of the things that lament does is say, okay, God, um, things are broken. Things aren't what they are supposed to be. We need you to be God. And there is a sense in which only God can fix this. That's how bad things are. There's nothing left for us to do but to cry out to you. But even in that crying out, we get changed as well. And I think it's because in that raw honesty, um, the prayer of lament, in its honesty, um, reveals things about us as well. It makes us think about who is the God we're crying out to. Did we get that right? Is this a real God, a true God, or is this an idol of our own making? What kind of God have we been depending on, and how is this an opportunity to drop our false idols, our false gods, and see God for whom God actually is, and then to behave as people who are trying to follow that God? And what these passages say, in part, one of the things these passages say is that our God is a God who would be crucified. Jesus would bear wounds and scars for us, and that was the way he was made known to the disciples. That Christ would come not just in glory and splendor amongst them, but as one who knew there were things worth being scarred for. So uh, I don't know what the time limit is, but I'll stop that for now.
Yeah, I'll say that I think for me the lament and the crying out to God is sort of the last. It's the last step before utter despair. That when we take that time to lament, we can say that we are maybe confused or perplexed, but not driven to absolute despair, and we may feel persecuted, but we're saying we're not completely forsaken, because we are still able to reach out to God. And I think that's that you make an excellent point, that we do have to try, that it does make us wonder, what is this God that we worship, and it does make you think about who are we crying out to in this, and what false idols have we maybe made for ourselves, or false impressions of what God is, and that in lamenting we can, I mean, perhaps lamenting can give us some clarity. It is to be hoped that we can get some sort of clarity from a true giving of ourselves to the lamenting process. That's sort of what I heard.
Okay. And Susan, some thoughts?
Oh my. I don't know that we lament really well. I think we lament, but I think we are very quick to try to solve all the problems ourselves. And so we complain and we gripe about it, but we don't really lament and lay it all out there and be honest, and not let God take care of it. But we don't give it the chance to sit and be in that space. We don't want to be there, so we don't spend time there. We just jump on ahead to we got to do something instead of waiting and being. So I think that's where I am with that. We don't. We like sometimes we like to sit and wallow with our wounds and get everybody to commiserate with us over our wounds. But do we actually let God help us heal our wounds? So, yeah. So I think that's where I am. Onward.
And it strikes me as you say that that maybe that is the role of the risen one in these texts, to almost not force, but to be present with great clarity about the experience, to challenge them to wonder what has happened rather than to move too quickly to resolution. It's like, see, I'm here. I'm here with my wounds. So let's sit with that and be okay with that and be present, and in that get clarity about the experience rather than move quickly to ascension. I've always been annoyed at Luke's having him there for so long, and yet now I'm pondering, 40 days. They needed to sit with the trauma before they could experience the spirit. Maybe. I don't know. Just throwing it up there. Now, my role is not to throw in too much of my own thoughts, but Susan's statement made something well up inside of me, which is, of course, why we have an empty chair there, because I'm sure for everybody present that is listening, that is participating in this, you're in that chair, and so have an opportunity to ponder yourself. What does this draw up for you? So I'll try and keep my own comments short. And so open it back up to our panelists in terms of the story.
I think another thing that comes to mind, I guess this works better with the metaphor of scars, maybe more than wounds, but I'm always struck in both of these passages that scars are a sign of life. And that Easter, we have all these wonderful symbols in the church for Easter and things to remind us of Easter. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we have Easter lilies and longer days and sunshine and, all of these wonderful ways in which we look out at the unfolding of the seasons. And it seems like everything is about fresh air and new life and growth and all of those wonderful things. Both of these passages also say an Easter symbol is scars. Scars are an Easter symbol. It's proof of life. I'm thinking of a friend of mine who has a wide, fierce scar across her stomach. She was in a car accident when she was a child, and for her, those the scars are signs that her life was saved. Not an ugly wound, but proof of life, right? So life for what? And it's this is an understanding she's come to over a long period of time, especially when outward and physical beauty isn't supposed to be something with scars, right? It's supposed to look in a particular way. No, scars are beautiful. Scars are a sign of life, but it's life for something. It doesn't have to be. We have the choice just to, this is not in contradiction to what you were talking about, getting used to the idea, because I think it can take a long time to figure out what for and to not rush in, and to discern, okay, what's the life I've been saved for? but there's got to be forward movement. So how does knowing that we're vulnerable help us move forward in a holy way, as opposed to trying to cover up that wound, pretend it didn't happen, and ignore it? Scars are signs of Easter victory. Okay, how do we live that out in a way that's holy and helpful and wholesome as well? And I think it must have something to do with not wounding others. Another thought.
I like that. I was thinking when you were talking about scars and how we love new things that are beautiful and untarnished and perfectly smooth, but it's in the ding in the beautiful brass vase or the scratch on the dining room table that all the stories are kept. And that's what the scars make them precious. And it's in the scars that the stories dwell and that the stories can be passed on from generation to generation. So we need the scars.
I've been thinking about the interesting concept of time and taking the time to lament and to sit with the scars, to sit with the pain, and to that we as children we learn that God is not a part of time, God is outside of time. We hear those things in Sunday school and they don't make a lot of sense to us, and we just sort of sit with that in our heads, and like so many things we learned as children, and you come up with your own ideas about it. But I think I see that we all know that we're in too much of a rush in general in the world today, that everything is, we're overbooked, we need to constantly account for every moment of our time. I know I struggle with actually taking real downtime. It's a struggle. But I've seen it, with the lament in my parish, because we have said goodbye to a building. And there was this feeling amongst some people in the congregation that we needed to immediately make a long-term commitment somewhere else, immediately find a new home, settle in just right now. And there were people who were very, very cross with the idea that we were going to take it slowly. And the cathedral was incredibly generous and invited us to come and spend time through Christmas and as long as we needed, while we think things through, and have a congregational meeting followed by an annual meeting, and really take time to think about things. But there were some people who wanted that final service in the building. Okay, we've lamented, we're done. We had our final service, we had our coffee hour, everybody had some donuts, and now we're done. And we're going to move on. And I think that's something that the church, there is a place for the church to say, whoa, you slow down. That's not, I loved that the idea of the 40 days for Jesus to and his friends to deal with the trauma of things, that it does take time. And it's something that we, at least in North America, are pretty unwilling to do these days, and maybe something that we can learn from God. Dare I say it? But that we do need to sit and take the time for that lament before we're able to get the clarity that we need. Yeah.
And so, Emily, thank you, because you've really opened us up into talking about church and what we're experiencing right now. And so, invite further conversations about what word or wisdom, insight does this text offer us to the church right now, especially in everything that we're going through here in Newfoundland and Labrador, across denominations. I mean, every denomination is feeling somewhat shell-shocked, hurt, angry, in multiple different ways. Discuss.
Okay, so as I have been walking, and I really mean walking, because that's about the only time I get to think about anything is in the mornings with the dog on a walk. Walking with these scriptures, it occurs to me that one of the things the church is lamenting is the lack of young people. And by young people, I'm going to say under 65, because the young people age keeps creeping up with me. And I think I had to expand the focus from the little bit of scripture that we were giving to expand the story backwards in both of them. So that in the John scripture, Thomas is not in the room. And we don't know where Thomas is. Was he gone somewhere else? Maybe he was outside the door standing watch so that anybody who was suspicious or the guards were coming, he could warn the others. Maybe he was gone out to get bread. I don't know where he was, but he wasn't there. So we've got somebody missing in the John story. If we back up the Luke scripture to the Emmaus Road part, we've got two people walking and lamenting. But then they meet Jesus, but they don't know that he's there. And they're walking with him and they're learning from him. And I kind of liken this to how we've done church for the past, 60 years for sure, probably 70, that the senior people in our congregations will tell you their experience of church growing up was they went to church in the morning for the service. They came back for Sunday school in the afternoon, and they were back again in the evening for service. But then somewhere in the 50s or 60s, we decided we'd put Sunday school during the service. And all the children were missing. They were outside the door. They were like Thomas. They weren't there. They didn't experience Jesus when he was in the room. But if you look at the Emmaus Road story, that's the story of the seniors. They were in the service. They walked. They were with. They heard. Then, as they grew and were older, they recognized. Thomas had to come back in the room, and everybody else said, "Oh, you can't believe what we saw," but he's not willing to believe it because he wasn't there to experience it. So that's where I think we've failed my generation and those after, was by shifting us out of the room so that we weren't part of the walk with Jesus on the Emmaus Road, so that we could be part of learning the stories of those wounds. Because my experience of Sunday school was coloring sheets and not much in the way of education. And unfortunately, that's, I think, what carried on in a lot of places, was children didn't get to understand how to walk the walk and learn how to be in worship. So of course, they didn't come when they graduated from Sunday school, they didn't come into the worship. And then they didn't bring their children into the worship, and their children haven't come to the worship. So now we are lamenting because where are all the young people? So that's where I find lament right now, and work with those two stories. We haven't learned, younger people haven't learned how to feel, see, and know the stories of the wounds.
You're speaking my language.
And what that, yeah.
I have said
and what
that so many
draws up in
times.
me, yeah. And what it goes beyond church, right? because we are experiencing tremendous trauma as a society right now, right? We're facing climate change, we're facing racism, we're facing transphobia, we're facing facing war, and we don't know how to process the experience. And young people have high levels of anxiety and depression right now, and maybe part of it is because we didn't give a vehicle to process trauma through the stories. Right? Maybe I'm just throwing this out there again. I don't know why. It's always what Susan has to say that triggers something in me. Don't know why. I guess because we spend so much time together. But anyways, I'll shut up again and let you all continue to talk this one through.
Susan, I really appreciate that. And like Emily, I do feel like, yeah, you're speaking my language, and I think it's no accident that the Sunday school movement of the 50s and 60s, if that worked, we should be brimming over with generation upon generation upon generation. And it's just proof that was a terrible mistake. And I think, there's a kind of a sad joke told about Episcopalians. You can decide if it extends to other Anglicans as well. But an Episcopalian goes to heaven or is walking through the pearly gates, and there are two signs. One is a sign that points to heaven, and one is a sign that points to a discussion about heaven. And Episcopalians will choose the discussion about heaven instead. And I think there's something about the formation that we haven't received by keeping people sort of away from direct experience of knowing Jesus in the breaking of bread, feeling our hearts strangely warmed as the scriptures are open to us. That also makes us, and we should tremble. The Bible's full of stories of people who are scared out of their wits when they have a direct encounter with the holy God, and that's very appropriate. But I think we've gotten keeping ourselves at a distance, protecting our children from direct encounters of Jesus. No, you must learn about Jesus first. You can't possibly go love him. That's just failed. And how do we get back? How do we step away maybe from being the gatekeepers of that? I think there's something in this waiting and maybe having time not just for lament, crying out for God, but grief first. But as Christians, we know that lament can follow. We can either just grieve, which is something all humans do, or we can, following that grief, call out to God and let God be a part of, okay, so where are we going next?
I think that there is a lament with that loss of the younger generations. My generation included, that we did go to Sunday school. You'd go to church with your parents, sing the opening hymn, and then we'd all sort of parade off to Sunday school. And then you'd be paraded back in so that you could line up along the communion rail and get a blessing, and then paraded back out again for your grape juice and crackers and snack, and in the Sunday school room. And then at the end of it all, your parents would come and pick you up. It was almost like you're not welcome. And there was a feeling too that like, this is probably too boring for you. You won't be able to sit through this. It's too boring. It's too dry. So is it any wonder then that when children sort of graduate and get confirmed or whatever, we say, well, the kids aren't coming back. And I how many times have I said, it's not coming back. They've never been. You have to do something in order to come back to it. They've never been here. And so I think that maybe is something that we should be lamenting, definitely. And I hadn't thought of it as something to lament, but we are lamenting every time we go to a meeting and someone says, where are all those young people? That's people crying out to God and saying, why have you why have you failed us? And maybe, again, not understanding what it is that that God's role should be in all of that. Maybe it's our role in sending the children away. Yeah. Why, that's interesting. Thank you.
So I asked this question not to put any of you on the spot. I'm not at all. But I think, okay, so what made the difference? You know, Emily, you've just shared a bit of yourself and your memoir of how you were treated in church, and yet here you are, a leader, somebody who's helping form others, someone who in your generation would be different because you're here big time, not just a visitor in the church, not just somebody grieving, but somebody trying to be part of the solution. Susan, you saw it happen, but what makes the difference in our lives? Why aren't we just people saying, "Oh, it's so sad." Well, I give up.
Well, I'm a
what
Sunday
keeps you
school
going?
dropout.
Mhm.
I dropped out of Sunday school when I was 8 years old and never went back. I instead joined the youth choir, which sang in church 2 Sundays a month. I stayed there with youth choir for 4 years. But during the summers, I would sing with the senior choir on Sunday mornings because my father was with us in the senior choir. So I would voluntarily go to church in the summer on Sunday mornings to sit in a service and sing. So by the time I was in grade 9, I was full-time member of the senior choir, and we sang 6 services each month because there was morning and evening service. So I stayed in church because of the music, because of the service, not because I went to Sunday school. And if you ask me to quote scripture now, I can't do it, but I can sing it to you. And I think it was the being in the service is the reason I stayed. And the reason I'm still here, and the reason I've railed against Sunday school for years, but didn't win that battle until Sunday school just kind of faded into the sunset on its own. And now in the congregations that I serve, we don't have Sunday school, but we have children's areas in the sanctuary where called Play and Pray. And children are there with their parents, and they are in the whole service, and they do the children's work of play, and they hear everything that's going on, and they're familiar with the service. And I hope they'll stay as they grow up because they are welcome and not put outside the door like poor Thomas.
And I had a similar experience, only with serving instead of being in the choir. That when I was confirmed, we were fortunate enough to have a brand new priest in our parish, and he wasn't even ordained deacon when he first came to us, and fresh out of seminary and in his 20s, and with a young wife, and they were fun, and as a teenager they were cool. He drove a fun kind of Jeep car, and we would go on adventures around the parish, and I would serve for all kinds of stuff. I would serve every single Sunday, and I would sit through the services, and I loved them because it was fun. I was a part of it. And my parents were in the choir. They were also very much a part of it. So we were all part of this thing together. And I see it in my daughter now, who's just turned 16, that like me, she always just went to church. And right now she's been busy since COVID started. She runs the live stream for our parish. and is very happy with the work and proud of her work with that, and feels like a valued member of the congregation. And I think before that, she was involved with some serving and other things. And I think that when you actually do sit through the service week after week, and it becomes familiar, and you feel valued and a part of this thing, I think that's what keeps you engaged and keeps you going. And I don't know. And you offer it to people. I mean, as a clergy spouse, I know that it gets offered every time kids will go through confirmation class, and we'll say, would you like to come and be a server? Would you like to join the choir? Would you like to? And honestly, the single biggest thing we snub up against these days is hockey and swimming and all these other things that I'm not saying those are bad things at all. I think that's just the world we live in. But it's difficult to compete with it when the kids have not gone to church up until that point. Really, they get brought in for confirmation because Nan wants them confirmed, usually. More likely Nan than mom and dad. Nans are incredibly powerful. Never underestimate. They're closer to God than any of us will ever be. So so they come and they do the thing, and they get their picture taken, and then they're done, because they've never really been there. And I don't know how to turn that around. But the thing that's made a difference for me is being a part of the actual worship service on Sunday mornings. Absolutely.
And I think it's the children who have been an actual part of the worship service that take church to the community. And just because they're not there on the Sunday morning as they're teenagers, young adults, working adults, having children of their own, just because they're not there, they have the grounding, the background, the knowledge. They take church into the community where church needs to be, not just centered in the building. We're so stuck on our buildings. My daughter's in the military, and she comes and tells me about these conversations that they have about theological things. And because she has some background, she's also a student at Queen's, but she has background that she can help. And so that's where our young people who are grounded in church can be. And I know we've gone way off our topic of lament. Sorry.
I think it's fine though, because
I think we're gone into the hope.
We're into the hope, which is good, because in the stories we know, I mean, Jesus commissions them, sends them off, right? And Spirit sends them off into the world to speak their experience and to give meaning, to help people discover meaning in their own experiences through the lens of this encounter with the Holy One. So, and what struck me, what you said, Emily, was about being valued, right? And how much do people in our world not feel valued? And so maybe that's, we said that we experience our trauma, we experience our wound, yes. We have people surround us in love and care in our woundedness because they value us. We experience that value, and then we go forth as people with compassion to do the same with others. And maybe that's just where it's all called to be for now. I don't know. Now go ahead.
I want to offer two quick things in response that for me are just welling up. One is that about community and the power of Nans, and I think I was formed as someone who also went to church, but one of the things that I really valued is that in my church community, there were other adults, in addition to my parents, who were lovely, wonderful parents, but other adults who saw me as a member of the community, a full member of the community. It wasn't dependent on my age. It wasn't dependent on my gender. It was because I was there and I had things to do. They missed me when I wasn't there. So being part of that community was really important. And part of what we learn through that is that it does go beyond the people who are related to us. Um, and um, and and we learn in the midst of that community other ways to respond to what's going on, including grief, right? So as a member of the church, I learned to lament, I learned to praise, I learned to hope, I learned by watching and being part of a group of people who exercise Christian virtues. It gives me the skills and the resources and the faith then to go out into the community. um, I also, I serve in a different context, and one of the churches that I served was large enough that we could do this. Um, One of the things that we did was, because of the here it's soccer and football and things on Sunday mornings, um, was to offer a service at a different time and to specifically say, not not shame on you for enjoying sport, but we need you and we welcome you, and we could gather a group of the nans who promised to be there Sunday evenings and to welcome kids who were coming in their soccer uniforms with their parents. And it was a way that in that community we were able to foster a group of young people who weren't told you have to be like us to fit in. That's never what we say on Sunday morning, ever. But that's, a message some people wrongly take, I think. Um, and I think that is showing, that we do get the Spirit, and sometimes the Spirit says, "Okay, try this now." Um, and in that community, in that context, that was a way we could try that worked. That wouldn't work everywhere, but I do think part of that new life is also um, saying to church, okay, you tried this. Um, that this hasn't been the pattern always. What are the essentials, and what are some other ways to offer those? But keeping the nans active is really important, I think, to the success of our endeavors to reach out.
Very, very, very true. God love all the nans. Any final thoughts? We're at I'm not yeah, we're we're about time to start wrapping up a little bit, but definitely additional thoughts you have on the texts or on lament or the church or what we've talked about so far. Just throw it one round, or one circle around again.
Not to be afraid of the wounds, to share the story of the wounds, the dents, the scratches, the dings in the door jams, to celebrate all of those, and to welcome people in, and to not be afraid to walk outside of what is our norm, to do the sharing, whether it's a different time of worship that looks totally different than what we're used to, or maybe it's just sitting in the cafe and overhearing conversations and doing something to act on them to help others with their wounds wherever they are.
I think it's all been really good. I'm trying to think if I have a final thought. I think it's been. I think I thought about a lot of really interesting things. I really I think the most important thing is about taking time. That I've heard from all of this is that we do need to take some time. and sit with things. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think that's the final takeaway from all of this for me. And that and I think
Okay.
also all the stuff about welcoming children and having them be a part of worship obviously is essential.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm so grateful for what's been shared, and yeah, rich food for thought. I guess a final, not to sum everything up at all, but just a final thought is how much this has. These stories are not about self-preservation. The disciples are not sent like Jesus does not come and say, "You're good. Stay just as you are. I've got this. I've got the wounds, but you do not change." He gives them gifts, peace, the Spirit. He shows them a new way to be. Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." That's a new understanding for him. They're not called to self-preservation, and we're not called to self-preservation either, I think. So that taking the time to discern and to make sure that we're following the risen Christ as that one goes forth, instead of yeah, but how can we stay the same? That's not the Easter message at all.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to the three of you. Our conversation has been fruitful, enlightening in so many ways. And I hope those of you who are in the listening and placing yourself in that additional chair have also had chance to ponder. And we will continue to ponder as we look towards our next edition of this, which will take us into Pentecost. So thank you all. And we sign off today. Blessings.